How do you do, neighbor? It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around, and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys. Welcome to Berean Spirits. My name is Richard Dodson. I'm the minister of the Kearney Church of Christ. This morning, Chris and Josh are not joining me. We are going to have a conversation on a topic with a gentleman named Daryl Townsend, a brother in Christ, that I do believe our listeners will find this to be most educational. And I'm looking forward to this. Now, keep in mind, as we come to you, this episode is previously recorded. So if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, there's no sense leaving any comments in the comment section unless you have a question that you'd like for me to forward to Daryl. And if that is the case, you can either leave those comments in the comment section, or if you'd like, you can send me an email to bereanspirits@gmail.com. That's bereanspirits@gmail.com. All right, Daryl. I'm very glad that you were able to join me this morning. Daryl Townsend is an elder of the church in Middleburg in Church of Christ in Jacksonville. It's just south of Jacksonville, Florida. And we're very thankful that he has taken the time to join us. Daryl works, or has worked, I guess he still does, in a prison ministry. It's called Off the Chain Ministries Inc. Its website is offthechainministries.com. And Daryl, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be here.
Now, Daryl, how long have you been working in a prison ministry?
So I started in 2004, but at that time I was the located evangelist at our congregation. And then in late 2005, early 2006, I started doing it full time.
Okay. Now, was there a reason why you decided to do that full time instead of just working both ways as a local evangelist and working as a prison minister?
Yeah, it was a combination of factors, but gradually the prison work had become more and more. At that time that I was still preaching, I was going to prisons 2 nights a week and doing classes plus one full day, doing what we call one-on-one Bible studies, where I meet one-on-one with an inmate and we'd study the Bible together, get to know them a little bit better, those kind of things. So it was slowly taking up more of my time, and I could tell that I could do more if I had more time. There was more opportunities. And early on, we saw the need to have some way to work with men when they got out of prison too. And so that's the reason for starting the nonprofit. And so it all just and things were working out at the church where it was a good time for me to step away. And so I continued to be a member there, still am, but just not doing the full-time evangelist duties.
But now at present time, you are working as a elder of the church.
As one of the shepherds there. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, have you found, are you having that problem again? Okay. And just for you might go ahead and plug that the church is looking for an evangelist to help you with this.
Yeah, we're looking for, we have our other elder is our evangelist also, Jerry Crolius, and Jerry's been with us for about 8 years. And just frankly, we just have a lot of work to do. So we're looking for somebody to come and just do local evangelism about 50% of his time in the prisons and the rest in the community and working with brethren. So yeah, absolutely. The thing about the prison work that's different than any kind of work that I've ever done, I guess it's similar to maybe some foreign evangelism opportunities in that there's more work than you can do. I mean, I could go to another prison every day. So it's just a matter of, you have to limit yourself to what you can handle and what you can do, but it's never sitting around saying, wow, I wish I had somebody to go study with or a class I could teach. You know, sometimes in the located work, you have times where you're kind of the lull and you don't have many opportunities to reach others, especially those that aren't Christians. Prison work's never like that. It's just how many prisons do I want to go to? How far do I want to drive? How much time do I want to spend there? It's like you've done some hunting and fishing. I would say it's like, shooting dove on a baited field. They're there. You just got to show up. I say it's lazy man's evangelism. You just go show up and people want to talk to you.
Hmm. I don't know if I'd call it lazy man's evangelism, but it's definitely a different type. Now, before I became familiar with men who devoted themselves to a prison ministry, I was familiar with the local evangelists, that which is what I do. And then there are those evangelists who work gospel meetings, and they just solely work gospel meetings. And as you just alluded to, there are men who do prison ministries. And I was familiar with those, but I was really surprised that there were men who completely devoted themselves to prison ministries. Now, like, in this part of the country, I had not come across such men, so I was surprised to learn that this takes place. But this is nothing new for that part of the area, is it?
Well, no, it wasn't. The first time I visited a prison, I actually met a brother from institutional congregation that had been working full time in the prison for about 26 years. So some of those brethren have been more active, but I'd say it's still doing it full time is still pretty rare. I mean, most places, most people that I meet are either retired and they started doing it a lot of times, or they just have secular jobs. I've got a brother down near Tampa that I've worked with, that he's a truck driver, but on his day he works 4 days a week, and on 2 of his days off he visits prisons and does the service every Sunday. A guy named Steve Truby. So it is still kind of rare, although right in our area we've tended to. There's two other men that actually worship with us at Middleburg now that both work full time in the prisons also. And one of the brothers, Greg Whipple, had done evangelism work in Belize for about 10 or 12 years, and heard about our work, wanted to move back to the States. His family was at a stage he was ready to come back. And so he was a natural fit for it. Another was a brother named Carlton McPeak that just, I think, had done some evangelism work before and saw the opportunity. So there's tons of more opportunities for it. What's unique, I guess, about what I do is working with men after they get out of prison.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I do know that's something that you have stressed, is the trying to reform these men to get them more acclimated to living a Christian life.
Yeah, and that's why I think some people relate it to foreign evangelism a lot. It's like if we made a trip to, you had the brother on from Kenya, and I know Ed Brand Jr. I know Ed Brand, and if he just went over there and converted a bunch of people and then came back to the States and never went back, I don't think we'd say that was a very wise way to do it. It did some good, yeah, absolutely, but we would see the need to follow up with more trips, bring other people over, help them establish themselves to mature. And it's that way in prison, that coming from prison to free society again as a Christian is something almost none of these men have ever experienced. So to just say, well, good luck to you wherever town you end up in. Hopefully there's a church there that will welcome you, because frankly, there are some brethren who won't because of their crimes. And it's a unique subset of people too. There's some wisdom you have to use, I think, in working with men. I've made so many mistakes that so a congregation that's never worked with some men like this, it's difficult to do. And so it didn't take long for me to say, we need to follow up these guys. We've worked so hard. We've taught them the gospel in prison, and some of these men I've known 4, 5, 6, 10 years in prison before they ever get out. They don't need to most of the time go back to their family. Their families are dysfunctional and the people they used to be around. So, we always say in prison, people, places, and things, you got to change those. And so it just didn't make sense to not be able to work with them once they got out and try to grow them and see if they can make that transition. I was real naive when I first started. I thought I was going to be Moses and just go in and bring them all to the promised land. And then I forgot that Moses only got 2 across the finish line. So
That's a
It,
good
it
point.
was eye-opening to me. If you just look at the difficulty. So most of the men we work with don't make it. And I'm not just taking guys that I don't know anything about. These are men we've worked with, we've taught the gospel to, we've seen things in their lives in prison that show that they, at least on some level, are putting forth an effort to make changes in their lives. But it's a hard transition to be out in the world again. Wine, women, and song. Uh, those are limited in prison in a lot of ways. You get out here, it's harder.
Now, these men that you work with in prison, are these hard criminals, or are these men who are normally going to be out in a short span of time?
The whole gambit.
The whole
So
thing.
murderers, we work, which is kind of unusual even among brethren. Sometimes we work with sex offenders. We actually have gotten guys with sex offenses that have come out that we house and help get started that are members of our congregation, all the way down to driving on suspended license, to DUI, manslaughter, to domestic battery, to murder. So every gambit, the prisons we work in, some of them are more minimum security, like the one that I do a lot of work at, Lottie Correctional, but others have the full range. So we don't limit, try not to limit. If a guy wants to study the Bible, I don't care what his charges are. We'll study with him. Some, work with guys for years now. I've known some guys who are now been doing it 18 years that have life sentences. So I just do what I can to encourage them and help them to be, busy in the kingdom in prison. That's what they're going to have to do the rest of their life, and they just got to learn to serve God there.
It's important for you to have the support of your brethren at the local church, right?
Oh, yeah, I get way too much credit for what goes on. It's the support of the congregation at Middleburg and guys that go to other congregations, that they get that it's not just me, that they begin a connection with the family. That's important.
If you are to bring a new convert from prison who's released from jail and you bring him to the local church that you're there in Middleburg, if you bring them there, and let's say they're on the sexual predator list, has that had any problems with the members or with possible members?
Yeah, for sure. So our method of handling that from the beginning, I've tried to always say I'm going to be transparent with the congregation about everything. So before a guy comes that's coming to our program, I'll announce to the congregation, so and so is getting out next Thursday. He's coming to the transition program. These are his charges. If you want details about the specifics of his crime exactly, but he's a sex offender, and he's guilty. He's not a guy that's in there because he didn't do what he said. So I'm not trying to, because sometimes people will paint a pretty picture so they don't have to deal with the reality of what people have done. So I try to be upfront if people have questions. Obviously we're careful. They're not going to be involved in children's classes. They couldn't do that anyway with probation and things like that. But we try to just be wise about it. We've never had an issue, but we've had people that have left the congregation when they found, we've had people that have come and started visiting with us and really like the church, and then they find out, half the men that were involved in the service today are all out of prison. That turns people off. And then we've had people that won't come because we have sex offenders worshiping with us there. So
Yes.
I'd say it's not ever been a problem within the congregation, but people that are new to the congregation, it can be a challenge for them. Yeah.
I've had experience myself with that. I converted a man who was on the sexual predator list, and we would have possible new members that we'd have to disclose it.
Right.
And that would be something, and it's most unfortunate because Christians, everybody comes out of a world of sin, and we should be looking to help those coming out of sin instead of trying to run away from it. But needless to say, it is something that I believe every Christian needs to have their eyes open toward, because this affects our work of the church. If we start being prejudiced toward those who have committed what we feel are more serious sins than what the Bible displays or talks about, then that definitely can hinder the work of the Lord. That I don't believe the Lord's going to be pleased with that. If we look at the church in Corinth, many of them had come out of various sins that described as very serious, but
Amen.
Paul didn't give up on them. And so that's one thing I do hope our listeners take from this conversation, is that it's important for us to look upon someone's past and with open arms bring them to Jesus, instead of trying to be afraid of them just because they have a past. These people are trying to make a change, and so we need to be inviting toward that. Now, one thing, Daryl, I'd like for you to describe when you first start this work. How did you begin? How did you jump into this? How did this all take place? Did you lock up on me?
It did here a minute ago too. You still with me?
Yep. Yeah, you can go ahead and speak. It kind of
Okay.
locked up, but sometimes if we're having connection problems with the internet, it'll do that. But if your picture freezes, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and keep talking. But
Okay.
did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So it's not like one day I woke up and went outside and the heavens opened up and there's a voice that said, "Go to the prisons, Daryl, and reach all these men." I was in the dairy business for 20 years before I started doing this. And so I wanted to do something more than work with cows. I liked the dairy business. I enjoyed it. But I did see that I could do more in the kingdom. So that's when I started preaching at Middleburg for the first time. So I was in my 40s when I started preaching to begin with. But a former member had a son that had gotten in trouble, and he grew up with my boys. And he was in the county jail, and they got in contact with me and asked me if I'd go see him. So I did that. And to do that, you have to get permission with the chaplain and whatnot to go in. And so I did that, and I mentioned to the chaplain, I said, "Look, if you ever needed somebody to teach a class or something, I'd be available. Just let me know if I can help." And he called me a couple months later, and they had a class available on Saturday nights working with juvenile offenders that were being tried as adults. So mostly 16, 17-year-old young men that were being charged with things like rape or murder, very serious capital crimes. So I started doing that, and I had about 2 or 3 men every week in that class. And one of those young men wanted to be baptized. We'd studied the gospel, and so they didn't have a facility at the jail. So he was getting ready to be sentenced to go to prison. So that's when I got in contact with Gary Wider and found out about the prison. They have a reception center that all the men from the counties in the area go to before they're sent to the facility they're going to stay at. And found out we could go there and do the baptism, got permission, went in there, was able to baptize him, met Gary, and started sitting in with Gary while he was meeting with inmates. And I said, "Wow, this is awesome," and got to know a few of the inmates, and that led to us going there and doing a Bible study at Reception Medical Center, about an hour away in Lake Butler. That started. Then I found out that within 30 minutes of my house was the first faith-based institution in the United States, Lawty, Lawty, Lawty Correctional. So they had a mentoring program on Thursday night, which some denominations were involved in, and you sat in small groups and studied the Bible or talked, whatever you wanted to do. So I went and started doing that, and after a couple of weeks, just taking my own group of guys and study with them. There's some other brethren from the church here at Middleburg that wanted to get involved. So after a while, we had our own room, and we were sitting in small groups just doing Bible studies with guys. And so it just began to grow and grow. So like I said, I never intended it, never been to a correctional facility or a jail like that in my life. I never even thought about it. That's the sad thing for me is we lived around there. Within an hour drive of my house, there's over 12,000 inmates, not including county jails. That's just prisons. And I never thought
Okay,
one
Jerry.
time about trying to go in there and reach him with the gospel. Never even quite what Jesus said, you know. so so that's kind of how it happened, and just the opportunities were there, and that's I've talked already about how I started doing it full time.
Hmm. Well, that's quite interesting. Now, the life that's inside of a prison is much different than the lives that we live, the environment that we're in outside of prison. And maybe you can talk about that. Now you're converting some. Talk about how a new convert can adapt to that type of life inside of prison. Daryl, I don't know if we.
There's, I'll keep talking if it goes through. There's a dorm setting where there's a big open bay dorm, they call it, with rows of bunks. And so guys are living in there. So they live very exposed lives. You can't hide anything in prison. So the challenge is to really live a different life, becoming a Christian, because guys are watching you all the time and they're super sensitive about hypocrisy, like everybody is. And so the life of these men is the challenge because there are drugs in prison. There's, pornography. There's a lot of still temptations, but the challenge is for these guys to put on godliness in their life, to change their way of thinking about things, the complaining, the rebellious spirit that exists in prison in general. So look, most men in prison don't want to change. We work with such a small percentage of men. It's a lot of men, but there's about 100,000 men in prison in the state of Florida. And we work with a small group of those. And even out of that small group, there's only a few of those that are serious about really changing their lives because it's a monumental change. I grew up in the pews. So going to church and living a moral life was something that was instilled in me young. I didn't always do it, but I always knew the right way. My dad was an elder in the church for 20 something years in Jacksonville. But the backgrounds, I mean, you can go in there and you can just feel sorry for these guys. Most of their backgrounds are just terrible. I mean, there's a guy at my transition house now that was introduced to alcohol by his father when he was 6 years old. He passed out for the first time drinking when he was 13. So that was just the way, the environment he grew up in. So now to become a Christian and never live that, you've lived this messed up life, and then you're in a place that's like Sodom and Gomorrah, and to try to step out of that is challenging to say the least. And so, but there's no magic formula. You just teach them the word of God, and that's what transforms lives. It's what transformed my life, your life, everybody's life. So there's no secret formula. We just deal with, I guess, I deal with those practical things when we're studying, when I'm preaching there, teaching there, is how do I live that out today? So it's a lot of that kind of, dealing with each other and how do I deal with changing the way I think about things. And I've thought the wrong way my whole life.
Darryl, I've been reading a book, and it was given to me by a member who used to attend church with us in Kearney. She's a prison psychologist, and she gave me a book called "Games Criminals Play in Jail," and it was very eye opening. In fact, it's something that probably everyone should read. But it's about manipulation and how manipulation is used by the prisoners in jail. And they can become very, very good at what they're doing. They have all kinds of time to think about how to manipulate people. In fact, one of the stories that the book gives is as a prison guard who starts off, they manipulate him into thinking he's just a friend of an inmate. When everything's all said and done, he's being forced through manipulation to bring drugs to him into the jail. And he ends up losing his job over it without getting in deep with the story. But manipulation, it appears from this book,
Mhm.
is something that takes place in their lifestyle in jail. And I'm sure you have probably come across prisoners who are coming to you with false motives, maybe looking to manipulate you in some way. And so, can you tell us a little bit about the games that prisoners play when they try to use you, and how you have to shake off the disappointment that comes from someone who's trying to use you as you're just trying to share the gospel with them? Daryl, you locked up on me. Let's see if he doesn't come back here in just a second.
Yeah, and like I said, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
So, you know, I was about as naive as they come when I first went in. I believe everybody that was there was telling me the truth and is really what they wanted to do. And so, working with men when they got out really opened my eyes. And so, I just you make mistakes and hopefully you learn from them. So, we talk a lot about manipulation. The Bible uses the word deceit.
Yeah.
That's the same idea. And Satan's the great deceiver, so it shouldn't surprise us. So a lot of that is just, working with men. So I've worked in facilities long enough that I work with men, and then I work with men who live with those men. So it's very rare anymore that somebody can be living a double life and I not know about it. Because I teach the guys, hey, look, this guy wants to come to our program. If he's not living right and you come to the program, he's going to harm you when he gets out. He's going to affect you. So we need to have that relationship in here where we have some honesty and some trust as to what you're doing. Again, that doesn't mean I know everything, but at least helps me to avoid the obvious things. So I tell people I've gotten really good at knowing who not to bring to our program, but I'm still have no idea who's going to make it. But I am wiser about picking out guys that will write to you and they ask for money because they need, quote, cosmetics, deodorant. That's the big thing, right? So you have to learn early on that you don't give in to those kind of things. That's not the relationship we're trying to establish. I'm here to bring you the gospel. If you don't think that's enough, then you're not the kind of person I need to be involved in. I'm not going to bring you in glasses. I'm not going to bring you in something to write with. I'm not going to bring you in whatever. I'm here to bring you the gospel. And if you don't want that, then you need to go see somebody else. I'm not here to feed you. There was an instance at Lottie Correctional one time where the Catholic group was coming in the same day I was doing a class. And their idea was they brought Danishes in, and after their mass, they fed everybody Danishes. Well, they would literally have too many people to fit into the chapel. They had to start cutting it off. And it's funny, we'd sit in these volunteer meetings with the staff, and many of them coming from denominations who bait people in all the time. But at prison, they could see these guys are manipulating you. They're only coming for the Danish. And their mindset was,
He should come back in just a second.
we don't in the church in general, but in prison also, it's just a dangerous mindset. So we want to come in with one thing, and that's the gospel. And we're trying to attract men that's all they want. So part of the problem is once they find out you have a transition program, sometimes you can get some guys that just want, a leg up when they get out, when they find out, we help them get their driver's license or whatever. But usually if I can know a guy long enough, we weed a lot of those out. So I think most of the guys that fail, almost all the guys that fail that come to our program, it's not because they were manipulating me. It's not because they had this grand plan from the beginning. It is because they got out and they just got choked out by the weeds and the worldly things.
Now, Daryl, tell me this: if a local evangelist has always had an interest in the prison ministry and he has no experience with it, uh, give him some advice. What can you tell local evangelists about how to get started in it? And can he do it part time, for instance, along with his local evangelism? Uh,
Yeah, I certainly. So you got to understand there's a difference between working with county jails. Those are short-term guys. Somebody might be in there for 60 days. Those are men that have been charged with jaywalking to, serious crimes. Working with that group's different. That's a temporary high turnover group. So you might go there every week and teach a Bible study, but you would have a different group of people every few weeks. So it's hard to do any long-term teaching there. There's value in it. And I know brethren that do that. And that's a simple way sometimes to get started because every local community has their own rules, has their own access. And some are very easy to get into and get involved in things like that. I never liked that as much because my idea was always go in and build relationships, find people that want the gospel, build relationships. You can't really do that in jail.
No.
But with jail, you can preach the gospel and you can expose men to something they've never been exposed to. So there's value in it. So the prison work, there are men that are going to be there. You don't go to prison in the state of Florida unless you've been sentenced to at least 1 year. So on average, I'd say most men are going to be there over 3 years. So you have an opportunity now to work with a guy on some longer level, some longer basis. So if you're in an area, it's identify the local prison and then just go through the chaplain in Florida. You have to go through the local chaplain and they approve you to come in. You know, they do background checks and fingerprint you, those kind of things. But then you just ask, how can I help? What can I do? Are there slots available where I could teach a class? So our mindset has always been, you go into a facility, you work, you hopefully convert men to Christ, right? Now you have these brothers in Christ. Now, what does the Bible tell us? They need to grow in Christ. They need to become mature. So you want to work on that. And we want to be able to then have these men participate in New Testament worship, the Lord's Supper, a cappella singing, those kind of things. So if it was in the local area, I would say first, can you get in there on any level and teach? And if you can, then the goal would be once you've taught men and baptized them into Christ, then could you also do something on a Sunday, a service on a Sunday afternoon or something like that to provide men the opportunity? That's how we worked at Lottie at the beginning. We started out with a mentoring program, right? We converted some men and then we said, hey, could we have a Sunday service for these men to be able to take the Lord's Supper and sing and hear a lesson? So we started doing a Sunday service, and we've been doing a Sunday service there now for over 18 years. But that's a long-term commitment. You got to have help because you'll burn people out. And that's the other thing. You have to be careful. You know, that's one of the things I did early on. It was exciting. It was new. Everybody wanted to come, but this is a marathon. You want to come do a service in prison? Guess what? It's every Sunday for the next 18 years or whatever. It's not, let's do a month-long Bible study, then we'll take a quarter off and then we'll do something else. So somebody has to be the consistent person, the evangelist or somebody to say, okay, we're going to do this long term, but we need to get a group available so everybody can kind of rotate in and out a little bit. Because it's hard for most brethren, and I understand it, to commit that kind of time on that level for ongoing. I mean, you know, theoretically that could go on. So there's been a Union Correctional, which is about an hour from my house. It's one of the oldest prisons in the state of Florida. There's been somebody from the Lord's Church that's done a worship service there for over 50 years. Now it's been different men over the years, but it's pretty amazing when you think about that.
That is very much amazing.
Yeah. And so again, that's kind of the model that I've worked off of. When we go in and teach, convert some people, then if we can find, so if it like I do a service once a month at a prison that's 3 hours away. Well, that's not ideal. I can't do that every week. So ideally we'd like to find brethren in that local area that could come in and do the service each week. I'd still like to go there and work with men a couple times a month or something like that and encourage. But it's just a lot of times, especially where some of the prisons are in rural areas, it's hard to find brethren who'll do it. And unfortunately, you go talk to brethren and some brethren are just like, that's about the last thing in the world I ever want to do is go into a prison and talk to a bunch of inmates. And it's a shame. I tell people, look, you don't have to be involved in prison ministry, but we all need to be involved in the kingdom. And if you're so busy that you can't go to prison, fine, no problem. There's no benefit to teaching a guy in prison more than your neighbor or somebody at Starbucks, right? But if you're not doing that, if you don't have your schedule full, then why not take advantage of an opportunity that's there? And so I don't try to give people guilt trips because they're not doing prison work, but I'm just like, hey, do you want to serve in the kingdom? Here's a chance to serve. And if you could just do it one Sunday a month, that would be a benefit. And, so one thing I was surprised about with prison work is you almost always run into men that grew up in the church, that grew up in the pews, that their parents were Christians. That surprised me. I guess I never thought through that. And so to deal with a man in prison that's knew what it was like to worship according to the New Testament pattern, be in prison for a number of years and have to put up with a denominational, I'll use the term mumbo jumbo that goes on most of the time. And then to have somebody from the Lord's church come in and offer a cappella singing and take the Lord's Supper. I've seen men weep because it'd been, 20 years since they've had a chance to take the Lord's Supper. And we just take that for granted. And I'm saying to be able to go in once a month and offer that, it takes a few hours, of your time. It's a big commitment, but to give those brothers in Christ a chance to remember the death of our Lord and examine themselves, that's once you get caught in that and see that, it's hard to say no from then on.
Well, thank you, Daryl. Those were words that needed to be said. I think that was the best part of our conversation this morning was those things that you just shared. Now, one more thing, and we'll end our conversation for this morning. But the men in prison that I know they get transferred a lot to different prisons. And the problem being is if you convert someone, some of these prisoners that I had talked to said sometimes they don't even get noticed that when they're getting transferred. They just all of a sudden they come, they take them, and instead of being in one prison, they may be in a totally different part of the state, and that can affect your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a common part. Now, when you get into these specialized institutions like we have in Florida, if you don't do anything wrong, you can pretty much stay there for quite a while. So that's another benefit. They have institutions now in the state of Florida that they consider good transfer institutions that you have to have certain behavior level before you can go there. And once you're there, you can stay there until your EOS end of sentence date comes up. But the longer you work, the more men you've worked with get spread out, or men you've worked with got out, got back in trouble, they end up in prison again. So I've got a guy at the house now that two men at our transition houses that have already come through our program one time already. Both of them got out, both of them got in trouble again, fell back to the world, went back to prison, and now they've repented of that, made some changes. Now they're coming out and we're giving them another shot. So you can't control that. So you can write, to stay in touch with those men. But ideally, if like for instance, the brother I was mentioning to you, Steve Truby, he's down near Plant City near Tampa, and he's working at a facility there called Polk Correctional. So if I had a guy that I was working with get transferred down there, I would contact Steve and I'd say, hey, Steve, John Smith here is a Christian. We work with him up here. He's a guy that's trying to make some changes. He just showed up at Polk. Will you try to find him and meet with him? And then I would write to John Smith and say, hey, there's a brother down there, Steve Truby. They do a Sunday worship service and a Tuesday night Bible study. Do what you can to get involved in both of those. Sign up for them, whatever you have to do. So if you have brethren at those places, it's not so bad. We can kind of transfer each other. So while we're not working, obviously, local congregations in some cooperative sense, as far as, something that wouldn't be biblical, there is a lot of cooperation that needs to go on with us talking to each other as we pass men around. Or if a guy comes to a facility that I'm working with and Carlton over here baptized him into Christ, I need to know that. We want to welcome him. We want to say, hey, brother, we're now here to help you grow more. So we need more brethren in facilities. It'd be nice that every facility somebody went to, there's somebody from the Lord's church there that we could say, hey, go contact Richard. He's there. And unfortunately, we don't have that, but we've got, some facilities. And so you write to guys. I can do a visit. In Florida, they call them spiritual advisor visits. Every inmate can have one where he requests to see me, and it doesn't matter what facility he's at in the state of Florida. I can go and see him, spend 2 hours with him, meeting with him. So I'll do that usually a couple times a month, where I'll have a guy that I knew before, or somebody from the church will write to me and say, my son just got sentenced to prison. He's at this facility. Would you go see him? And so I can go visit him. And then depending on his interest, we can go from there.
Um, Daryl, I do appreciate your time this morning. I appreciate you taking this opportunity, and it's very enlightening information. There may be some evangelists who have an interest in this type of work, and I would invite everyone to visit Daryl's offthechainministries.com, his website. And Daryl, if they would like to talk to you and have more questions, do you have an email that you can share with us?
Absolutely. So it's my first name, Daryl Town, first four letters of my last name, DARYLTOWN at AOL.com.
DarylTown at AOL.com. And I'd like to invite any minister who has an interest in this type of work to contact Daryl, and I'm sure he would be glad to assist you in any way he can. Now, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on Facebook or YouTube. If you would rather receive this, remember Berean Spirits does offer. We are on podcast. We are on Spotify and different platform, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and Archer. And there's if you're on iTunes, go to the Kearney Church of Christ page, and you can watch us there, and on SoundCloud as well. That's under the Kearney Church of Christ page. So, and if you're on another platform and I'm not naming these off, just send me an email and I'll try to do what I can to get you get on a platform that you do use so that you can hear this show as well as our other shows as well. Well, Daryl, I do appreciate again for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to come to you again and maybe have a different topic, and you might be able to join the show at that time as well.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Until next time, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad. Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean Spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.